I want to talk about something, an idea that I want to talk about, because there are issues that we see in the world. We see that there are people who take their religions very seriously, and they wind up turning to violence. This happens in many different religions. I don't know if I could say it happens in all religions. I would say certainly it doesn't happen in the Jain religion. But to a certain extent, there are violent groups within every religion, even among the Buddhists, which is for the most part a peaceful religion. But there are extremists. Generally, the violence is on themselves and not on others, but there have been cases among Buddhists of violence. So I'm not calling out on Islam in particular, because to a certain extent I have a tremendous respect for Islam. Our theologies are almost identical, our practices are very similar. So what exactly is the issue? What do we see here? What causes these type of things, and what can be done to reform society so that these things don't happen? The fact of the matter is, Islam had a reformation about 400 or 500 years ago. Al-Ghazali, I think was his name. Who in many ways was a moderate who was seeking to make peace, but he also took the Muslim world away and had tremendous influence in the Muslim world. Not total influence, but tremendous influence, as what's the fellow's name? Neil deGrasse Tyson likes to point out that there was a tremendous turn away from science, which was a major force in the Islamic world up until that point. Muslims were some of the greatest scientists in the world, some of the greatest philosophers, mathematicians, historians, authors, poets, artists. Of course, their art was abstract, and all of these things came to an end, for the most part, with the influence of Al-Ghazali. But we can put that aside for now. I want to address something. At least that's how Neil deGrasse Tyson understands it. On the other hand, Al-Ghazali sought to unify, find a common ground between traditionalists and Sufis. And for the most part, the Sufis have always been among the most peaceful members of the Islamic society as well, historically. So, there are various things that, we have to look into. Why are things the way they are? In Islamic society today, but the question is, what lessons can we learn from other traditions that have had their own reformations? And because for the most part, I think most Muslims, particularly those who come to America, are more or less reformed. I remember some years ago there was a reality show that I happened to be staying at my parents' house at the time. It was called All American Muslim, and to the point where there was, at the end of the show was that there was this it was only 6 episodes, I think. So the very last episode ended, one of the major figures in the show, he was talking about how he went on the Hajj, and there he was praying that his favorite football team, should win the Super Bowl or something like that. And he said, how do you get more all-American Muslim than that? And and that is, I'm not saying that because I'm not a sports fan either, but that is a very interesting demonstration of how you can assimilate without losing your identity, without losing your faith. Not saying that that's for everybody, but it is an interesting thing. But what I really want to talk about was a question I don't know if it was directed toward me or I just volunteered to answer it. There's a website, Quora. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, where people can post questions and they post answers. And once I don't really like reading it. Sometimes I feel triggered reading it. That's why I tend not to read it. So, whatever it is, what it is. So one of the questions was, how does Orthodox Judaism deal with the violent passages in the Torah? And I've discussed this in past videos, and I think it's worthwhile to reflect on this. And in many ways, this is my chief apologetic defense outside of logical explanations of why we believe what we believe. But the major apologetic defense I have of what's often referred to as rabbinical Judaism is how if as the secular world views it, we see the rabbinical Judaism as a movement, which I would traditionally say it isn't. I would traditionally say that's the original Judaism. That's what my tradition teaches, and I have reasons to believe that. I have arguments that can say why we would assume that to be true. But truth of rabbinical Judaism is that it is truly a religion of peace, not in an ironic way or in a redefinition of peace way. But in an authentic way. The rabbinical approach to Judaism, if it's not a movement, it's certainly an approach, as opposed to others that are movements. Although certainly there is movement within rabbinical Judaism. Things do move in rabbinical Judaism. But what I mainly want to bring out is that I remember a few weeks ago I saw an article from Matt Walsh, and someone asked him, well, didn't Jesus hang out with sinners? And Matt Walsh said, no, he didn't hang out with them. He tried to change their lives. He tried to whatever. So they said, so what's this thing about, he is without sin, cast the first stone? And he said, well, that was just, a critique of the Pharisees who took things too far. The Pharisees of his day were taking things too far. And the fact of the matter is, if you study the history and you study the theology and practices of the rabbinical Judaism, who are generally called in an insulting way Pharisees, there were groups that self-identified as Pharisees that were not really the mainstream of the rabbinical Jewish world. But in a kind of insulting and ironic way, the Sadducees, did call the followers of rabbinical Judaism Pharisees, and that's not what they really were. And there were groups that were truly Pharisees that were or categories of individuals. They weren't really organized groups. They were more like psychological categories, really, who who properly had that title. The term was more fitting to them. I think they might have even self-identified as such. But in kind of an ironic way and almost an insulting way, the Sadducees would refer to the sages and followers of the sages as Pharisees. Prushim is the Hebrew word. So when people self-identify today as Pharisees, as I used to do when I was younger, I see there's one blog, your Pharisee friend. It's not really, unless it's like how, I don't know, some people, they'll reclaim certain words that might be a racial epithet or some kind of insult, but they'll use it among themselves, and then if someone else uses it, they say, well, that's our word, you can't use that, you know what I'm talking about. So, I don't know, maybe if that it's used in an ironic way, a reclaimed way, I don't know, it's not a term, we don't generally refer to ourselves as Pharisees. But that being said, it was the Sadducees who were the ones who were the violent ones. who were stoning people, who had no qualms about handing over Jews to the Roman authorities. Why? I'll tell you what it said. I'll tell you a passage from the Talmud. I heard Moshe Weinberger elucidate this in this way, and this is kind of where I'm getting this idea from. And I think he got it from other sources as well. I remember hearing it from him, so I'll say it in Davar B'Shem Imre. I just learned this Gemara yesterday or 2 days ago. It was just yesterday. It was Messiah, Maseches Makos, and started Maseches Shavuos. Sometimes I've seen him call it Malchus. So in Maseches Makos, it says like this, that how foolish are the Babylonians who stand up for a Sefer Torah and don't stand up for a Gavar Rabbah, a great man. And what does that mean? Who's a Gavar Rabbah? A Talmud Chacham, a Torah sage, a Talmudic sage. It literally means disciple of the wise. And And it said, well, why is that? Well, because the Torah says that a criminal receives 40 lashes, but the rabbis teach when it says a number of 49. It says the Torah literally says a number of 49 or a count of 40, a count of 40 or a number of 40. Mispar Arboim, and the sages interpret that to mean 39. So, and that's what the Talmud says. So, even though there's an argument, there's an opinion that says it is 40, and the extra one is administered a slightly different place between the shoulders. But generally, it's understood that it's 39 and it's not 40. And I think that's the psak, is that it's 39. So. And then they go on to say, if that they have to be checked by a doctor to see if they can handle lashes, and if they can't handle it, they don't receive it. If they're seen that maybe they could receive 18 lashes instead of 39, and after the 18, the doctors then say no, actually they could do all 39. He could do another 21 rather. Then they said, no, you can't do it, meaning all these things. So what's the idea that we're having here is that that what Rabbi Weinberger explains it like this, is that the power of a sage, power of a Talmud Chacham, is to remove lashes, remove pain. Alright, so the Torah says 40, we'll figure out to make it 39, and if we can even make it 18 or nothing at all, we'll do that as well. To try to, he understood that in a little bit of a homiletic way, but also in a practical way. The fact of the matter is that, the sages sought to abolish the death penalty or limit it as much as possible. The sages sought to abolish war. The sages sought to abolish violence. Even though the sages sought to say it's impossible to meet all of the requirements by interpreting the Torah in such a way, generally understood to be a tradition, going back to Sinai. But by interpreting the Torah in such a way that many of these very violent passages in the Bible are impossible. The rebellious son, no such thing. The city, the wayward city, no such thing. Never was, never will be. It's a moderating force in Judaism to have these things. It makes Judaism much more peaceful because of the rabbis. The rabbis make it a much more peaceful religion than if you had a solo scriptura approach to the Bible. Now, that doesn't mean we throw out the baby with the bathwater. We don't cut these passages out of the Bible. They're there for a reason, and we say there are lessons that we can learn from them. So too, many Muslims will say the same thing, that the great jihad is the